All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer, where we are unpacking what is honestly one of the most fascinating, chilling, and heavily debated topics we've ever covered. We're pulling directly from an incredibly insightful text called Shadows over Salem, The Architecture of Mass Hysteria. And the thesis of this source is absolutely brilliant, because it doesn't just look at what happened back in 1692, it examines the actual architecture of how a society completely unravels. By breaking down the specific structural failures that allowed a localized panic to escalate into a historic tragedy, we can start to see how the blueprint for mass hysteria actually operates. And let me tell you, understanding that architecture is just as vital today as it was centuries ago.
Okay, I want you to really put yourself in this scenario for a second. It's the winter of 1692. You wake up in this tightly knit, kind of claustrophobic farming village where, let's face it, everybody knows everybody's business. You're just going about your day, but then you notice something chilling. Your neighbors are whispering your name. And man, look how fast the dominoes fall here. By sunset, those hushed little whispers, they've escalated into loud, direct accusations. And by the end of the week, your normal life is just gone. You are standing trial in a courtroom. It's a completely terrifying, rapid escalation, literally a waking nightmare, unfolding in a matter of days, fueled by a community that is entirely turned on itself.
So what exactly brings you to that courtroom? Well, the charge is beyond anything you could ever really prepare for. You are being accused of serving the devil. Now, to truly grasp the absolute dread of this, we've got to get into that 17th century Puritan mindset. The devil wasn't some abstract metaphor to them. He wasn't a spooky campfire story meant to scare kids. No, to them, the devil was a literal physical entity actively roaming the New England woods, trying to recruit an army to wipe out their settlement. This isn't a petty dispute over property lines, folks. This is a charge of supreme, supernatural treason. The second this sudden accusation drops, your very soul and your actual physical life are instantly on the line. Which brings us to a pretty massive problem. How do you defend yourself against the supernatural? The answer lies in a deeply flawed legal concept they used called spectral evidence. Basically, this was the idea that a witch's spirit, their specter, could leave their physical body to go torture victims or commit crimes somewhere else. This is what created a literally impossible courtroom scenario and left the accused totally helpless. Think about it. There's no physical evidence, because the crime is spiritual. There are no tangible eyewitnesses. If a teenager suddenly drops to the floor convulsing, pointing at you and claiming your invisible spirit is biting her, how do you logically disprove that? You can't exactly provide an alibi for your soul, right? You are completely, inescapably trapped by the invisible.
I mean, everything we just went over, the paranoid whispers, the sudden accusations of devil worship, this inescapable courtroom trap where your own invisible spirit is somehow testifying against you. It sounds exactly like the meticulously crafted plot of a modern horror movie, doesn't it? But here's where the illusion of fiction entirely shatters. This is a true story. Real, everyday people face this exact terrifying machinery. People like Giles Corey. He was an 81-year-old farmer who was literally crushed to death under heavy stones simply because he refused to enter a plea and validate this insane trial. Or Bridget Bishop, the very first person they hanged. This horror wasn't a Hollywood script. It was happening right there in their town square.
So let's officially lay out exactly what we're looking at today. The Salem witch trials. We are talking about one of the darkest true stories in American history. It is the ultimate example of a moment where a community's foundation, its justice system, and its religious moral compass just entirely collapsed under the weight of panic. And the scale of this collapse? It's staggering. We're not talking about a handful of people having a bad week. Over 200 innocent people were formally accused of witchcraft. Dozens were thrown into horrific, freezing jails for months on end. And ultimately, 20 people were executed, with several more dying while languishing in those awful conditions.
Now, more than 330 years have passed since all of this tragedy went down. You'd think, right, that over 3 centuries of historical digging would have settled the dust by now. But nope, the debate has honestly only continued to rage on and evolve. Modern experts come at this from totally different disciplines. Historians are poring over old court transcripts looking for legal anomalies. Psychologists are studying the trial records for signs of clinical paranoia or group delusion. Sociologists? They're mapping out the wealth distribution of the village to spot class conflicts. It seems like every single time a new discipline looks at Salem, a grand new theory emerges about what actually triggered this catastrophic breakdown.
So let's run through some of the big questions fueling this debate. First up, were there actual witches? Well, the text draws a really clear line between malevolent, devil-worshipping witchcraft and the reality of 17th century folk magic. No, there absolutely weren't people flying around on brooms or signing the devil's book in blood. But there were individuals, like an enslaved woman named Tituba, who practiced traditional folk magic, fortune-telling, and relatively harmless protective charms. But in a hyper-religious society, authorities deliberately twisted those practices into evidence of a vast satanic conspiracy. They essentially blurred the line between everyday superstition and a capital crime.
Okay, so if we rule out actual supernatural intervention, we've got to look at the psychological theories. Was it just mass hysteria? Experts have heavily researched this concept of mass psychogenic illness, which is where profound psychological stress actually manifests as real physical symptoms, like the seizures and wild contortions those accusing girls were exhibiting. Then there are these absolutely fascinating environmental theories, like ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, and it actually contains a compound super similar to LSD. So could a localized outbreak of food poisoning have caused mass hallucinations and spasms? Did a whole society just lose its grip on reality at the exact same time? Or, let's pivot to the sociological angle for a second. Was this actually about political revenge? When you map out where the accusers and the accused lived, a pretty chilling pattern emerges. Salem was deeply divided between the poorer farming community of Salem Village and the increasingly prosperous merchant-class folks in Salem Town. On top of that, you had these bitter, multi-generational feuds between prominent families, specifically the Putnams and the Porters, arguing over land boundaries and church leadership. The source material strongly points out that opportunistic neighbors recognized the chaos of the trials and thought, hey, this is the perfect weapon. They used witchcraft accusations to settle petty disputes, legally confiscate land, and permanently destroy their economic rivals.
And of course, we absolutely cannot ignore the incredibly volatile environment of the time. Was it extreme religious fear? Puritan doctrine was incredibly heavy and oppressive, constantly preaching that humanity was inherently depraved and under constant attack by dark forces. Now, take that suffocating spiritual paranoia and compound it with very real recent traumas. This community was reeling from brutal frontier conflicts, like King William's War, which literally brought refugees, violence, and extreme anxiety right to their doorstep. Add in freezing winters, smallpox outbreaks, and a constant terror of the dark, unknown wilderness. That cocktail of trauma and extreme religious dogma, it totally primed this community to frantically seek out a scapegoat.
But what if it's something even more complicated than that? This actually brings us right back to the core thesis of Shadows over Salem. The architecture of mass hysteria isn't just built on a single pillar. It wasn't just ergo, or just a family feud, or just religious zealotry. It was a perfectly constructed, catastrophic structural failure, a complex, tangled web. Religious fear provided the vocabulary, political opportunism provided the motivation, and mass hysteria provided the momentum. All these factors structurally reinforced each other, creating this unstoppable engine of destruction that a single explanation just simply cannot capture.
So, when we strip away centuries of folklore, the Halloween caricatures, and all those pop culture adaptations, what the historical data actually reveals is honestly far more terrifying than the myths. The reality isn't about ghouls or monsters hiding in the woods, it's about the very real monsters that ordinary human beings can become when systems of justice and reason just completely fail. By looking at the hard facts, we get a direct understanding of the mechanics of mass panic, proving that the true horror of Salem was 100% man-made.
And these are events that forever changed America. The Salem witch trials permanently altered the course of our nation's legal system. The profound regret that set in after the trials led directly to the banning of spectral evidence in courtrooms. It forced this critical, agonizing shift in American jurisprudence. The absolute disaster in Salem served as this harsh catalyst for establishing something we rely on today: the presumption of innocence, that idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, based on tangible, empirical evidence, not just hearsay or invisible crimes. It stands as our nation's ultimate cautionary tale about the fragility of justice and the sheer danger of unchecked groupthink.
Uncovering the terrifying truth of Salem leaves us with a lingering, deeply unsettling reality. When you look back at how fast those morning whispers turned into an impossible courtroom with zero chance of defense, the distance between 1692 and today suddenly feels uncomfortably short. In a moment of extreme societal panic, when fear overrides logic and the line between fact and myth blurs completely, how safe are any of us from the whispers of our neighbors?